There may be a couple of questions for Dr. Seeley or Drew Kessler. If so, the two of you want to come up? Any questions for them? I think the lunch is just about ready. And so if we have any questions for either one of these two, I would appreciate that. Dennis, did you? Let's see. There's one back there.
This is for Dr. Seeley. Why did the normal go from a 30-year span to a 20-year span?
Why did the normal go from a 30-year span to it didn't?
Oh, it didn't?
No, I mean the use of statistical averages has been mandated for generations as 30 years. Now, it's not that we should be satisfied with 30 years. I mean, 30 years is, from a statistician standpoint, is kind of thought to be a minimum. But the difficulty that the world has with doing averages, climate averages, is that there are many countries in which the climate monitoring networks do not have the longevity of that of the USA or other countries. And in order to get good spatial description of the climate in many of these countries, they've tried to find the happy medium, if you will, of what period of time, what minimal period of time can you get something that is statistically meaningful and still include a lot of the stations that are in the network, because many are not so old. So it's kind of the world standard for using a 30-year average is kind of a compromised position. Many in the climate research area would love to see averages drawn from periods of longer duration, but it would make the sparsity of data shrink, and it would make it more difficult to spatially describe the climates of many regions. So I didn't mean to infer, if I said something that alluded to being a 20-year average, that's not valid.
I just added wrong.
Okay.
Any other questions from Mark?
I had a follow-up to Dr. Fox.
Oh, he's got a follow-up to Dr. Fox.
You mind if I go back to that question again about what part of the hydrograph is most important for this erosive movement? And I liked your response, which was it's probably the peak that removes it. But let me just add on to that question. What part of the hydrograph is potentially delivering it then to move it down to where it can?
Okay, so you're talking more about sediment delivery as opposed to the actual collapse. And
yeah.
So from a collapse standpoint, it's the peak and shortly after the peak where you get a lot of the movement. Depending on what size sediment fraction you're looking at, you can get significant deliveries even under base flow conditions if you have a lot of fine particle sizes. So I don't know that you can rule out that there's only one part of the hydrograph that's transporting a lot if you're looking at considerations of both coarse and fine size fractions.
Thank you.
One right here.
I had another question for Dr. Seeley. I was just curious if you've looked at any of the groundwater levels and how it relates to the trends you were talking about, more recent trends.
The question was, have I looked at trends relative to groundwater in the same way as the climate statistics? And no, I haven't. There are some people in our DNR, and I'm sorry, the names are escaping me at the moment, but there are people in the formerly the Division of Waters within the DNR that I think have looked at those, but I can't recall what those statistics are. So I'm sorry about that.
Any others for our three speakers over here?
Yeah, for Dr. Fox, you talked about vegetation, but you didn't talk about trees much.
Right.
So I'm thinking especially of large trees on the stream bank.
right? The ability of those trees to protect the banks depends on the type of vegetation that you have, the type of tree. Some tree species are better than others, and there's been a lot of work done by Andrew Simon's group and Natasha Pollan in particular, of looking at different tree species and trying to quantify the additional cohesive strength that they provide to those banks. You know, they found things like sycamores are much better than willows. And it all has to do with the rooting depth. It has to do with the strength of the roots, the tensile strength of the roots, and the root area ratio basically on that failure plane that you see.
And what about large trees that get undercut and then collapse into the
large trees that are undercut they may be providing still a little bit of stability because the root systems are still maybe potentially in that bank, but that's an additional surcharge, that's an additional force that's acting on that bank. So when you see an undercut tree, you know, it not only has the force straight down, it's got the force, it's got the moment basically acting on it to try to force that tree to get into the water. So, yeah, we've done. There are some things that you can do to characterize. Remember, I told you about those stages. There's something that's been developed out of the sedimentation lab called a rapid geomorphic assessment. And you can go through your stream systems and you go through and you rate them based on the vegetation and how advantageous the vegetation is. You try to figure out what category it falls into, what class it falls into. And we did some work on the Illinois River in eastern Oklahoma, and that was one of the interesting things that we ended up deciding was that we weren't going to consider vegetation that was overhung as providing any additional beneficial strength for stability. That we were going to count that as basically an additional driving mechanism in that case. It all kind of goes back to that force balance.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we'd all agree we've had an outstanding presentation this morning. I'd like you to give them another hand, all three of them.